Hello and welcome to another monthly recap. This is for the month ending today, February 28th, 2025. Hope you all had a wonderful month. Thank you all so much for taking a little bit of time to check out what happened this month. Yes, Aaron's going to say it again. It was a crazy busy month. All right, it was no way around it. It was a really, really busy month. We're going to be talking about a lot. We're going to be talking and starting off with tariffs. Tariffs. It's not the first time you've heard about it. It's not the last time you're going to hear about it. Expect this to continue to happen possibly for the next 4 years. All right, this is going to continue to be a topic of conversation. So let's get into it. What are tariffs? What purpose do they serve? How are they currently being implemented? We're going to look at all of that. We're going to be taking a look at the Fed minutes. It's true there was no Fed meeting in February. There was a Fed meeting in January. Well, in February, we got the minutes from that January meeting. And there's a couple things worth getting into briefly. A couple things that are alarming the Fed that we should talk about briefly. I'm going to be talking about some recent trends in consumer spending and savings, which is, I don't want to say alarming. I don't want to be an alarmist, but concerning, noticeable. Let's go with that. Something that you need to be aware of, keep an eye out for. And we got a couple additional stats on that today, which is kind of fascinating if you're a total money nerd like I am. We're going to be talking about jobs and inflation. It's the Fed's dual mandate. I want to talk about that briefly. They were front and center, and there's some inflation has some work to do, and it has some work to do in a rather short order. We're going to be talking about that as well. And then mortgage rates as a whole, they actually had a pretty solid month. They improved from 6.875 down to 6.625%. That's for the first-time home buyer making less than 120% of the area median income, kind of one of those ideal scenarios. Anyways, rates did improve throughout the month. It was a pretty good month for mortgage rates. So let's get into it. Let's start with tariff talk. Okay, tariff talk. Say that 10 times fast. So tariff talk. So if you recall, the new administration had said on day one, we're going to enact 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, 10% tariffs on China on day one. Now, the executive orders happened on day one, day two, and none of this was actually mentioned. So the markets took a big sigh of relief and they said, okay, great, it's not happening. Fast forward literally just a week or two, and all of a sudden the government's like, yeah, no, we're doing tariffs on Canada, Mexico, Colombia, and China. Now, since then, they've walked back the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. They delayed those for 30 days so that they can hammer out some negotiation terms. Okay, they punted with Colombia indefinitely. Okay, so for Colombia, it was more of a shipping off illegal immigrants, according to the administration, and then whether or not Colombia was going to accept those immigrants into the country. A short kind of standstill negotiation occurred, and finally Colombia said, sure, we'll take them. And all of a sudden the U.S. said, hey, we're not going to impose those, indefinitely delayed. Okay, Mexico and Canada, very specifically 30 days delayed, so still could go into effect in March, theoretically. And then tariffs did go into effect with China. China had a little bit of a tit for tat. They came back with their own tariffs, and that is currently underway. Tariffs were also announced on foreign steel and aluminum. That's set to go into effect on March 12th. So anything involving steel or aluminum could theoretically get more expensive starting on March 12th. So let's talk real briefly about what are tariffs. Okay, tariffs are a tax paid on imports. Okay, stuff we're bringing in, it's a tax associated with it. Now, that tax gets paid by the company. Okay, the company has to pay that additional tax, which means a company can deal with it in a couple different ways, right? A company could theoretically just shrink their profit margins, pay extra for good, not pass along that extra cost onto the consumer. Okay, and if you're a skeptic like me, you'd say, what are the chances they're going to do that? Exactly. The second option is much more likely, which is they would pass that additional cost onto their consumer. Okay, onto their consumer, they would pass along that additional cost, increase the cost of those goods. Okay, those are basically the two ways that a company could deal with that tariff, deal with that additional tax. Okay, what is the point of tariffs though? Well, they can be used in a number of different ways. When our country was first getting founded, tariffs were used widely to raise capital for the newly framed government. They had to create buildings and they had to pay for militaries and this, that, and the other. So they had to raise capital. They would charge tariffs. Okay. Another option, and you don't hear about it so much in that way now. You usually hear about it in one of the next three ways. Second one would be leverage better trade terms. China is a good example of that. Okay. The U.S. wants to get better trade terms with China, so they implemented tariffs on China. Okay, use it as leverage, trying to negotiate better terms. That's really what the government is hoping for. Another option, another reason, is leverage better political terms. Okay, best example of that would be Canada and Mexico. Why did the U.S. impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico? According to the new administration, it had to do with fentanyl. They wanted to reduce the amount of fentanyl flowing over the borders. So basically, Canada and Mexico both said, great, we'll hire more border agents. Is that good? And the U.S. said, good enough to delay it for 30 days. Okay, so we'll see what happens there. But right now, kick the can because of hiring border agents, right? It's not better trade terms, it's hiring border agents, which is definitely political terms, right? And then the last one is they might want to simply encourage domestic alternatives. By increasing the cost of goods from China, it would force companies to look at domestic alternatives, domestic manufacturing options, domestic alternatives, instead of looking across the seas to China, okay? Now, you should ask the question, we all do, why would a company outsource that anyways if there was cheaper alternatives domestically? Correct, right? Regardless, they're going to have to pay additional costs, right? If tariffs go into place, the companies are going to have to pay additional costs. Whether it's turning to a domestic alternative, chances are it's more expensive. They would have looked that way initially if it was cheaper anyways, right? And they're likely going to pass along, and this is a side effect, pass along that extra cost to the consumer. That's inflationary in nature. Now, this is not just Aaron Staufer saying this. This is the Fed saying this. The Fed, with their Fed minutes from the January meeting, showed, hey, look, we are concerned about tariffs. We have some legitimate concerns about tariffs. Now, the Fed has a dual mandate. Their job is to keep prices under control, so manage inflation, as well as maximize employment. That is the two things they're most concerned about. Well, tariffs are inflationary in nature. Companies get charged more, they pass that extra cost on to the consumer, it increases the cost of those goods, that's inflation, right? So it's worth noting, not just from Aaron's perspective, but from the Fed's perspective, they are legitimately concerned about tariffs. Okay. Now, the Fed did acknowledge that there was really strong jobs the last few months, and because of that, it's allowing the Fed to be a little bit more patient than they otherwise may have been. What that tells you is if they get a surprise jobs number and jobs do start to show some weakness, they'll probably be more likely to cut rates. Okay. They also said, and this is probably the most concerning part from the Fed minutes, that they want to see inflation come down before looking at additional rate cuts. Okay. Why is that concerning? Well, I'll show you in a little bit here, but it's going to be hard to make meaningful progress on inflation. We actually got some really good news today. I'll talk about that in a second here as well. But it's going to be hard to make meaningful progress on inflation starting in the summer. Look and show you as to why that is the case as well. But anyways, these are the Fed's primary concerns. They're concerns about tariffs. They're concerned about inflation. They're feeling really good about jobs. Let's talk about consumer spending and consumer savings real fast. These are the, Aaron's not going to say it, alarming trends that are currently developing. Okay, so this is consumer spending. This is the billions of dollars that consumers in the U.S. are spending on credit cards and other revolving plans. Okay, primarily credit cards. So each one of these is a year and a month associated with the report, and it shows how much the Americans are spending over time. Right now, it hit an all-time high, 1.097 trillion, as of just a couple weeks ago, February 12th. Okay, all-time high. Each one of these gray numbers is where you see a recession. So what you see is kind of an increase in consumer spending and then a pullback, increase in consumer spending, and then a pullback. Okay, we've certainly seen an increase in consumer spending. A lot of what happened during COVID-19 is people started saving money at an all-time high rate. I'll show you that on the next slide. And they started to spend very little. They didn't have money places to put it. They were also just worried, right? We're pandemic. We've never been through one before. We just weren't sure what was going to require, right, of ourselves, of our household. So we just started to curb our spending. We didn't have anywhere to go, and we wanted to be a little bit more protective and start to kind of circle the wagons, right? Well, great. So you start to spend less money. Then rates get really low, and then the masks come off, and then people are making up for lost time. So they start spending money like crazy, and that's exactly what we've seen happen. A lot of those, poor, bad consumer spending habits that were developed when the masks started coming off and people had this pent-up cash, a lot of those have not been rectified. And then rates started to increase, and things got considerably worse. And that's really what we're seeing here. We're seeing as rates have increased, it's starting to cause this avalanche of debt, so to speak, and people have really struggled to kind of get on top of it. On this note, we actually got a stat today that those making the minimum payments on their credit cards, not just at Elevations Credit Union, this is across the entire country, those making their minimum payments only on their credit cards is at an all-time high, which means people are not able to chip away at the balances like they could before when rates were lower. So interest rates have a lot to do with this. But yeah, all-time high in consumer spending as of just a couple weeks ago. Consumer savings. Yeah, so we kind of saw the opposite happen, right? So during COVID-19, people started saving money at an all-time high clip. This is what percentage of your income you save. So during COVID-19, at one point it hit over 30%. People were saving over 30%. They had nowhere to go, nowhere to spend their money. They didn't want to be around people, and they were worried about what was ahead of them. So they just started saving money at an all-time high. Well, then rates drop, and then people take off their masks, and then all of a sudden savings rate plummets, right? This is not an all-time low rate, but as you can see on here, 3.8%, it's near the lowest levels we've ever seen. Okay, so between record high consumer spending and not quite record low consumer savings, it again, I don't want to be an alarmist, but it is a little bit concerning. It's something that we all need to be aware of. Another thing that popped up today is those that are 60 plus days delinquent on their auto loans hit an all-time high at 7%. Still not a huge number, 7%, but an all-time high with regards to autos delinquencies. Historically, auto loans tend to be really low. Historically, people pay their car loans. Okay, it's a collateralized loan. People need to get to work. It's one of the kind of non-negotiables for most people. So again, don't want to be an alarmist, but we need to be aware of it. All right, so let's take a look real fast at inflation data, and then we're going to be talking about jobs data. So let's start with inflation. So the beginning of the month actually had some kind of stinker inflation numbers. Okay, we got producer price index, which is wholesale inflation. Headline figure with everything included stayed stable at 3.5%. The core rate, when you remove volatile food and energy from it, increased from 3.5 to 3.6. It's going in the wrong direction. We want that to go down, not up. Okay, producer price index is the Rodney Dangerfield of inflation metrics. It gets the least amount of respect. No respect at all. So set that aside. We don't really care too much. Consumer price index. That is inflation as us consumers feel. It gets a little bit more respect than PPI, producer price index. It increased 0.5% in January. Pretty warm. Headline went from 2.9 to 3%. Not good. Going in the wrong direction. Core rate went from 3.2 to 3.3. Okay. Again, not great. Going in the wrong direction. That's not good. However, literally today, we got personal consumption expenditures, PCE. That is the inflation metric that the government most leans on. It is one they consider above and beyond all else. Okay, if they only got one, they would look at this one. Personal consumption expenditures. Headline went from 2.6 to 2.5. Yay, it's going in the right direction. Okay, not only that, but the core rate, which is the one they really, really care about, went from 2.87 down to 2.64. You'll see headlines saying 2.6. It's true. They round down, so they would call it 2.6%. That's great news. On paper, went from 2.9 essentially down to 2.6. Fantastic, really, really good news. Now, here's why I mentioned it's going to be hard to make up meaningful progress on inflation going forward. So whenever you look at year-over-year numbers, the number that gets added today, a number from a year ago gets dropped off. Okay, they look at quite literally the last 12 months, year over year. Okay, well, when we look at core PCE, which again is what the Fed most cares about, we dropped off a 0.5 figure. Great. Saw some good progress. Next month, 0.24, going to be harder to make up ground there. But once you get to May, now you're replacing some very, very, very cool mild figures. 0.08, 0.22, 0.17, 0.17. When you replace cooler numbers, even if the number you get today is not huge, if it's warmer than this, it's going to look like inflation is heating up. It's really tricky because it could be a very tame number, but if it's less tame than it was a year ago, it's going to cause that year-over-year number to slightly increase. So inflation has to make hay while the sun is shining, which is right now. Okay, both literally and figuratively. It is beautiful outside, and the sun is shining, and inflation needs to make up some progress because it's going to be tricky starting in May to make up some meaningful ground. We need to really take advantage of these warmer numbers and see inflation improve because it is going to be very tricky to make progress on inflation in the latter half of the year. Keep that in mind. We really need to see some strong numbers right now. All right, so let's talk about jobs. Jobs are confusing as all get out, man, and I'm going to be showing you exactly why. So let's start with job openings and labor turnover survey. It measures how many help wanted signs exist across the entire country, how many jobs are available. Well, there's currently 7.6 million job openings as of December. Now, this has decreased from 12 million in the post-COVID peak. You all remember that too. COVID-19 happened. First, there was a bunch of layoffs. Companies weren't sure what they were in for. And then people just started working from home. Masks started coming off, and people started spending money. And then employers had to ramp up really quickly, and they were hiring everybody under the sun. So went from 12 million job openings down to 7.6. Now, this is still probably a little bit misleading. Talked about it before, but the same employer could have the same job listed multiple times because of this remote workforce we now have happen in this post-COVID world, right? So it's entirely possible that a company can have one job, but actually have it listed 5 times in 5 different states. Theoretically, 50 times, right? So how accurate are these numbers? We still don't really know. But regardless, JOLTS would show you a softening jobs market. Bureau of Labor Statistics, now BLS. It showed 143,000 jobs being created in January, which is worse than the expectations of 170,000. But this number looked really good at the end of the day because November and December both revised their numbers up by 100,000 complete total jobs, and the unemployment rate did decrease from 4.1 to 4%. So JOLTS shows a softening jobs market. Bureau of Labor Statistics shows a jobs market that's very healthy. Fed says, hey, great, we listen to BLS, we don't listen to JOLTS, we think the jobs market is very strong. ADP employment report. They showed 183,000 jobs being created in January. Expectations were only for 150,000. December report was also revised up by 54,000. ADP tends to be a more reliable figure, and it also came in very, very hot. So both BLS and ADP are in agreement that January was a very good month for jobs, and jobs as a whole are very strong. I mentioned all of that because of this. Okay, we also got the quarterly census of employment and wages, QCEW. Okay, unlike BLS jobs report that we get every month, and we're going to be getting another one next month. Unlike BLS's monthly report, QCEW does not rely on modeling. Okay, BLS, big proponent of modeling. They will look at how many businesses were created, how many businesses went out of business, and based on that, how many jobs were created approximately. Okay, it's a huge margin of error. It's extremely unreliable. The QCEW is not unreliable. It is very reliable. It accounts for 95% of all jobs. No modeling, 95% of all jobs in the country that are created and lost are accounted for in this report. It reported 1.24 million job gains from quarter 3 of 23 through quarter 3 of 24. Okay, so one full year, 1.24 million jobs being created. That's 740,000 less than BLS reported themselves. Okay, this is still a Bureau of Labor Statistics report. It's just a reliable report as opposed to the unreliable report. They are missing their target by 62,000 a month, or almost 37%. 37%? 37%. Like, how can the margin of error be so high with the figure that is used to make such important economic decisions by the Fed, by the government, by everybody? It's mind-boggling. If I was 37% inaccurate on my figures, I would not have a job for more than a day. It's crazy. I joked last week they should change this from BLS to BS report because it's just so unreliable. They might as well just throw a dart at a board and say, hey, that's how many jobs were created. They're missing it by 37%. Absolutely insane. Now, how did the markets take this news? This is also interesting. The markets basically said, meh. Why? Because it's old data. To get these numbers as accurate as they are, it takes the government a long time. And because of that, the numbers are delayed. So, yeah, they don't care about quarter 3, 2024 for the year prior. Heck no. They care about what's happening today. Crazy, but that's how the markets digested the news. All right. So the Fed has a really important meeting next month, a really important meeting on March 19th. It is a meeting associated with a summary of economic projections. So not only do they meet, but they also have to put pen to paper and show where do they think rates are going to go from here. Fed funds rate, unemployment, GDP. They have to put pen to paper. They have to show their work, and it's going to be really, really important. Now, the Fed said, hey, we want to see inflation cool down before we feel confident to cut rates further. Great. They did see inflation come down, right? So, yeah, we saw what they wanted to see, 2.9 down to 2.6. That should be the number they're looking at, and that should be their basis for decisions as to whether or not they cut rates further, okay? Because of that, and we got that number literally today, because of that, I am cautiously optimistic we are going to see a federal rate cut in March. The markets are split. The markets are torn. The markets are not exactly sure what's going to happen. Sometimes we're very clear on what's going to happen. Maybe we'll get a little bit more sense as we get a little bit closer. But right now, if I was a betting man, I would say, yes, we probably will see another rate cut because the Fed also knows inflation is going to get worse in the second half of the year. So they need to plan accordingly. And if they're relying on that data, well, it's not really going to be supportive of any further rate cuts or rate movement. So that'll be interesting. Plus, not only that, they really like to make those rate cuts in a meeting associated with a summary of economic projections because they can show their work a little bit more, explain the reasoning, explain their modeling, do all of that. So fingers crossed, really hoping for a rate cut here in the next few weeks. All right. So what's going to happen ahead in March. Lots of questions. I got lots of questions for March. So big Fed meeting on the 19th. Will they cut rates? I hope so. We'll see. More tariff extensions, right? They've already kicked the can on most of these for a month or longer. We shall hope that that is the case again, selfishly, because inflation would be bad for the markets. Inflation would be really bad for mortgage rates. And I really like mortgage rates. So do we get more clarity on jobs? We got this discrepancy between BLS and ADP and then the QCEW. Like, what is what? What is going on in the jobs market? We see less job openings. We see consumers struggling. We hear about layoffs happening. We hear about government layoffs happening with Doge. Like, what is going to happen with jobs? What is going on truly? It's very hard to know. Maybe we'll get some more clarity. I kind of doubt it, but maybe. And then, like I said, it's going to be really hard to make meaningful progress on inflation starting in May. So hopefully we can really start to make some progress, make some headway in the next few months. It's going to be very hard to do so after that. All right. That is all I have for you. Thank you all so much for taking the time, spending the time with me. Really appreciate you all. If you have any questions, as always, hit me up. And thank you all so much for all the continued support. It means the world to me and my team, especially right now. I know things are hard out there. I really appreciate it all. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful month. Bye.